Hi, I'm Siobhan and welcome to Angelman Academy. We hope you enjoy this course. Please join our mailing list and stay tuned for the latest offerings to support individuals with Angelman Syndrome.
Hi, my name is Kate Ahern. Today's course is called I Can Have Safe Hands, Apraxia, Anxiety, and Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And we'll be specifically looking at those things in the Angelman Syndrome community. So I love this picture. This is a young lady named Samantha a few years ago, and you can see she's got 3 different communication devices and a communication book in front of her. Samantha's life changed in a major way when she got access to AAC and learned how to use it. And we're going to be talking about her quite a bit in this course. So one of the things that we need to think about is, what do we need to do if we want to teach communication? When we're looking at individuals with augmentative and alternative communication needs, or what we call complex communication needs, we're often thinking about how do we get them to communicate with us. And, the basics of this are, first we have to offer communication. We have to give them words. Then we have to model it. We have to use it ourselves to show them how to use that communication system. We have to specifically teach how to communicate. The same way we teach any skill, the same way we teach any infant, the same way we teach any English language learner, we teach how to communicate, and we have to reward communication. Communication has to be worth doing. And I don't mean that you get an M&M if you say, I want candy. I mean, the interactions that come with communication have to be rewarding in and of themselves. So our individuals who use AAC are inspired to use it more. We also have to remember that all behavior is communication. Our job as parents, as caregivers, as professionals, is to figure out what the individual who's using a behavior to communicate, instead of using words, be it AAC or verbal speech or sign language or some other system, our job is to figure out what is being said and then to determine the safest and most efficient way to say it, and then to teach that new way of communicating. So if we have a child who's typically throwing something because they're looking for eye contact or because they don't want the item, our job is to figure out what they're saying, either I don't want or look at me, and then to determine a better, safer, more efficient way to say that thing. Look at me, I don't want this, and then to teach the child to use that way. When we think about some of the common behavioral occurrences that we see in Angelman syndrome, first of all, a lot of these aren't talked about. Nobody likes to sort of brag that their child is having some difficulty with behaviors. But the more time I spend with individuals who have Angelman syndrome and similar disabilities, the more I see that these things can be somewhat universal. Hair pulling, we see a lot in Angelman syndrome. It's oftentimes an attempt to pull the person they're with closer to them. Sometimes it's an attempt to pull them closer just to get eye contact. Eye contact in Angelman syndrome, there's a need for it that's very profound because of the related anxiety. Infants turn to their mothers or their caregivers for eye contact whenever they take a new step in exploring their world. The idea that we make eye contact with a caregiver or a primary caregiving figure whenever we are trying to do something new or hard or anxiety-provoking is ingrained deeply in everybody. But in Angelman syndrome, we see sort of such a reliance on that eye contact and that need to get you to look into their eyes for them to be able to feel calm and confident in themselves and their world. And sometimes hair pulling is a great way to get somebody's face in front of your face to make that eye contact. So what we need to do is we need to figure out, again, what's the safest and most efficient way to meet the need that is behind these behaviors. Biting is a behavior we see in Angelman syndrome. Sometimes it's related to a need for deep pressure in the mouth. Sometimes it's related to a look at me behavior. Sometimes it's related to I mean it, sort of an emphasis behavior. And sometimes it's a teasing behavior in Angelman syndrome. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but I've seen that in a few kids. Throwing items. I've seen that to mean a few different things. So, like I mentioned already, sometimes throwing items is about saying, I don't want this. Sometimes it's about getting you to look at them. If they know when they throw something, you look at them and say, no throwing, then they've learned that throwing something gets eye contact and attention. We'll talk a little bit later about how working with behaviors in Angelman syndrome is different. Typically, people who are in the field of behavior analysis would say any attention-seeking behavior should be treated with ignoring. Unfortunately, when that attention-seeking behavior is related to anxiety, ignoring increases the anxiety and increases the behavior or creates even more negative behaviors. So we'll talk a little bit about anxiety in a few minutes. Disregarding safety is something that we see in individuals with Angelman syndrome and related disabilities. A lot of times that has to do with not understanding that something's not safe. So walking near a street, walking off with a stranger, touching something that's hot, touching the stove, any of these things, they may not understand that there's a danger there. And they also may not understand the language of don't touch that, it's hot, because of various problems with processing language or of too much stimuli at the same time. So they're getting visual and auditory and kinesthetic and all this feedback at the same time. So they may not process another outside stimuli telling them don't do that. Sleep-related behaviors, we see a lot in Angelman syndrome. These are almost always neurological. And as our toiling-related behaviors can be neurological, of course, these can both be related to anxiety. If you're any person in the universe who's ever had a big test or a big presentation, or they're going on a trip and they don't like to fly, or any of those things, knows that the night before they may not be able to sleep. Well, if you have the level of anxiety we sometimes see in our individuals with Angelman syndrome, it's not unusual or it's not surprising that we would see sleep-related behaviors when you're anxious all the time. And the same is true with toileting-related behaviors. A lot of young children have problems with toileting as far as, you know, the anxiety around I need to do this thing that everybody really, really wants me to do, and I don't know if I can, and I'm anxious because I'd like to please everybody. And then you add to that some of the issues around just like any child would have with, you know, going in the toilet, especially moving your bowels, is you're sort of saying goodbye to a part of yourself for very young kids. So that can be scary. And then there's the issue of pain. A lot of our individuals with Angelman syndrome have had a history of constipation, which is neurological. The brain's neurological functioning system runs through the central nervous system and runs through the gut. And the vagal nerve runs from the brain through the chest, by the heart, and into the gut. And both of those are affected by the neurological disabilities in Angelman syndrome. So the constipation caused by that neurological activity can cause pain. And then we have some behaviors around fear and being afraid that going to the bathroom will hurt. So anxiety-related behaviors there too. And then you add to that not understanding what's happening. You add to that maybe not knowing the steps of going to sleep or going to the bathroom, not knowing what's going to happen when you wake up. All of these things can feed into behaviors and difficulties with sleep and toileting. Another important piece to think about is sensory issues with touch. A lot of individuals with Angelman do not want their hands touched. They have very hypersensitive hands. I don't have it written here, but many individuals with Angelman syndrome have very, very good hearing. They have hyperacoustic hearing. So they may be hearing noises and sounds that we don't hear that are upsetting to them. Sometimes you'll find that even shutting off the fluorescent lights in a room because they buzz and we tune it out can help calm somebody who is feeling overstimulated. There might be some sensory issues with clothing being too tight or too loose or rubbing the wrong way, and there might be a need for deep pressure. I've never met a child with Angelman syndrome who does not like to get squeezes, whether we're squeezing their hands or their feet or their head, or have your occupational therapist teach you how to do some deep pressure with your child. You may find it to be extremely calming. Water seeking is a very, very common Angelman syndrome behavior, and it is also neurological. We don't quite understand the process of why we see this so much in Angelman syndrome, but we do see it, and of course that can lead to issues with wanting to run water in the sink or in the tub or hose outside, or stealing people's drinks to be able to touch the liquid. So that's a neurological piece. The mouthing of self, so chewing on hand or fingers, or wrist, or chewing on clothes. I have a child who likes to chew on winter coats. Chewing on any of these things could be the deep pressure in the mouth, and it's calming. It could also be they're just at that oral stage of development where they're able to perceive the world a little bit better if they've felt it in the hypersensitive nerves of their mouth. Non-compliance, I've put in quotes. Non-compliance is anytime somebody doesn't do what you tell them to do. I think that a lot of times non-compliance, quote unquote, in children with disabilities gets stigmatized when opposed to non-compliance in children without disabilities. If a child without a disability doesn't do what we ask, they can explain why. And if a child who has a disability doesn't do what we asked, we assume they're being defiant or oppositional, or they're not following our requests because they're a hard kid. But oftentimes there are other reasons a child might not comply, and I think we really need to think about, especially as the child gets older, allowing kids to be themselves, and remembering that our goal is always cooperation and not compliance. A child who obeys on command is important when you're doing something like crossing a street, or, learning how to cook or being around something dangerous. But in terms of learning how to be who we are, which is our biggest job of growing up, non-compliance is developmentally appropriate, and is to some degree a social skill. So we have to be thinking about cooperation versus compliance, and what a non-compliance situation might mean. If we hear a child was non-compliant, we really need to delve more deeply into what exactly happened and looking at why. Dropping to the floor, some people call that flopping. I like to call that pulling a Gandhi. It's a form of civil disobedience to drop to the floor. A lot of times kids who drop to the floor are saying, I don't understand what's happening. I'm anxious. Where are we going? Why are we going there? Or I know where we're going, but I don't want to go there. Or, you take me to the cafeteria. It's too loud. There's too many people. I find that upsetting. So I'm going to protest in my only act of civil disobedience that I can. And I'm going to pull a Gandhi and lie on the floor because I don't want that to happen. Of course, this can be very dangerous in a busy hallway or out in the world. You can't be lying on the ground just because you're upset or you're anxious or you don't want to do something. So, thinking about the safety related to this, but then again, going back and looking at why is it happening and what's going on here. Food-related behaviors are very common in Angelman syndrome, both refusal to eat or a limited diet, but also a hyperphagia, which is eating everything, food, non-food, wanting food constantly. Sort of the insatiable appetite that comes along with the 15th chromosome sometimes when we have problems with the 15th chromosome. So that's really common that we see. Pushing away people or things, it's a very common way to say, I don't want that, don't give that to me, I don't want to be with you, or I don't like you, especially if you have no other way to say it. And I'm sure over time I'll discover more behavioral occurrences that are across many individuals with Angelman syndrome. But all of these usually have some kind of purpose. They have a function. They mean something. And if we can figure out what the function is of these things, if we can figure out, what does it mean when this child pulls hair, or what are the 3 or 4 different meanings it is, then we can start to address that. So I work with an individual who throwing items always meant look at me. So we were able to address that simply by putting a button that said look at me on her AAC system, and then teaching it specifically and through modeling that if you wanted someone to make eye contact, you could say look at me. And that behavior all but disappeared. Another family I have talked with a mom with, I haven't actually met their daughter. We're at a workshop I was giving, and I talked about this issue and the idea of look at me, and it stopped all of their hair pulling behavior in the car. Driving had become very unsafe because the child was pulling mom's hair when she was driving the car. And a button that said look at me allowed the child to request eye contact that the mother could give through the rearview mirror, and it eliminated pretty much all of their hair pulling behavior in the car. So sometimes there's a really simple fix, but first we have to figure out why are these things happening, and we have to always consider it from the perspective of the child. One thing I haven't mentioned here is pain. Sometimes kids are in pain, and that's why something is happening. So I have a young lady who will start having her hands in her mouth all the time when she has a toothache or a cavity or a sore throat. And so that increase in mouthing of self, which isn't a behavior we normally see in her, almost always means there's something going on in her mouth or her throat. And now that we know that, we can watch for it and address it more quickly. Sometimes we'll see in our young ladies that the food-related behaviors increase during their cycle, and that's something we need to be thinking about. Sometimes we'll notice that sleep-related behaviors have a lot to do with the clock change, and early rising starts to happen as soon as we set the clock back. And then that lack of sleep because they're having sleep-related behaviors. They're exhausted, so we see all these other things increase because their tolerance has decreased. So thinking about these things in terms of what do they say, and once we figure out what they say, we can start to teach a better way to say it. Okay, so why are we going to do this? Why are we going to use augmentative and alternative communication to treat or to help treat what is negatively viewed behavior? Negatively viewed behaviors are often to communicate a specific function or to meet a certain need, sensory, neurological, or anxiety. And we can teach better ways to communicate. Now, the reason that this is important is that if a child has a lot of aggressive behaviors or a lot of behaviors that are seen as antisocial in a way, then it's going to be much more difficult to keep them in inclusionary settings, to include them out in the world and out in activities that are happening in group settings. A child who can state what they need to say, I'm anxious because too many people are here, instead of flopping on the floor when they enter a crowded room, is a child who is much more likely to be treated with kindness and understanding than a child who's just lying on the floor refusing to go somewhere. So using augmentative and alternative communication can really not just improve the life of the caregiver, the person who's having their hair pulled or dealing with a child lying on the floor, but also improve the life of that child in such a way that their world becomes much bigger because they're able to cope by using communication to help negotiate their world. Another thing we really want to think about is what is anxiety and what is apraxia. So anxiety, most people have felt some anxiety in their life at some time, is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease. So it's usually about something that's going to happen or about something with an uncertain outcome. So you might feel anxiety if you're leaving a couple minutes late for work and their traffic is worse the later you leave, so the outcome is uncertain. You don't know if you're going to get there on time. Or you might feel, I feel anxious going to the dentist. So that's usually an imminent event that's on my calendar that I have plenty of time to build up lots of anxiety about. And it's an uncertain outcome. It could be I get a cleaning and everything's great, or it could be I find out it's going to cost me $1,500 to get a new crown. So lots of reasons to worry there. Anxiety disorder, which is different than just being anxious. You can be anxious and not have a disorder. Anxiety disorder is a nervous disorder characterized by excessive uneasiness and apprehension, and it can be associated with compulsive behavior like OCD or panic attacks, but also generalized anxiety disorder, where the anxiety is increased to such a state that it interferes with functioning. The real difference between anxiety and worrying about something that's an appropriate anxiety and an anxiety disorder is the amount of anxiety in line with what's happening? And is it associated with some of these things like compulsive behaviors or panic attacks? I think everybody on earth feels anxiety some of the times, and I think individuals with Angelman even more so. But many of our individuals with Angelman syndrome may also have an anxiety disorder, and that's something you should be talking to neurology and other members of your team with if you're seeing a lot of anxiety. Something to remember about Angelman syndrome and anxiety is it may not look like anxiety that we see in other people. So in other people, you don't associate happiness with anxiety. But in Angelman syndrome, you'll see a lot more smiling when the child is anxious. And I know we're smiling a lot of the time in Angelman syndrome. But why are they doing that? Well, smiling and eye contact create a social connection, and social connections help us feel safe. So if your child is very anxious, they may do a lot more smiling and making eye contact to calm themselves down. So you may actually see an increase in laughter and eye contact when anxiety has increased. So it's something you need to watch. Another thing that we need to keep mind of is people who do not understand anxiety or Angelman syndrome may see behavior as somewhat devious when it's paired with smiling or laughing. It's harder to accept that a child is anxious when they're smiling and hitting you. If the child is upset and crying and they hit you, you can say, okay, they're upset. If the child is laughing or just smiling a lot and they hit you, it feels confusing to those of us who don't understand Angelman syndrome. So we have to really remind ourselves that the smiling masks a lot in Angelman syndrome. That happiness, that happy look on their face can mask a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry that they're having. And we have to make sure the people who spend time with individuals with Angelman syndrome know that, so that they're not feeling confused if the child hits them or pulls their hair or drops to the floor, and they're grinning at the same time. It's easy to think that a child who's grinning is deliberately upsetting you, and that's 99.9% of the time not what's going on in Angelman syndrome. I'm not saying that there can't be a little bit of manipulation. I always get excited when I see a child with Angelman syndrome sort of up the ante and the ability to play the game with other people. A child who has figured out that if they say with their AAC system, I love you, I want ice cream, who has sort of reached a higher cognitive ability to know that if they pair those two things, they might get what they want more quickly and more easily. The other piece we need to understand about Angelman syndrome and a lot of other disabilities, including a lot of individuals with autism, is apraxia. And this can also be called dyspraxia. A means absent of, and dys means a dysfunction of. So usually apraxia is a total inability to perform functional motor movements, and dyspraxia is a dysfunction of performing functional motor movement. In Angelman syndrome, we're oftentimes, without saying it, talking about apraxia of speech. We'll say apraxia, but we mean apraxia of speech. But this applies to all parts of the body and all functional, deliberate, intentional body movements, motor movements. So apraxia is the inability, and dyspraxia is the dysfunction of the ability to perform a functional motor movement on purpose. And this is despite the fact that the command has been understood. I say touch your nose, and you understand I'm saying that. It's despite wanting to make the movement. I say touch your nose, you understand it, and you want to do it. And having the physical skills, you are physically capable of touching your nose. And it is a neurologically based phenomenon as opposed to a behavior. It's a behavior in that we can see it and we can measure it, So what I'm calling a behavior here is different than what your ABA specialist may call a behavior. A behavior in ABA is anything you can see and measure that isn't physiological. This is physiological, and that's often misunderstood. They think it's not physiological, but it's a physiological part of the neurology of Angelman syndrome, is the inability to intentionally do something with a motor movement, oftentimes speech, even though they understand, they want to, they have the skills. The thing about apraxia is the more you want to do it and the more the pressure to do it, the less likely you are to do that motor skill. So you may tell your child 10,000 times, you need to touch this button on your AAC device, or you need to hand me that PEC symbol. The more pressure you put there, the less likely they are able to do it. It's very opposite of how we think of many things. We also need to think about the fact that anxiety increases apraxia and apraxia increases anxiety, and they play off each other. So if you start making demands on a child who is unable to follow that demand because of their anxiety, that will increase, because of their apraxia, that will increase their anxiety. And if a child is anxious, their apraxia will be worse, right? Or their dyspraxia will be worse. So these things go back and forth between each other. So we've got that anxiety, and then we've got this neurological phenomenon of apraxia with the intentional motor movements, oftentimes the movements to communicate, be it through speech or some other means. I know this all oftentimes sounds very surprising to people who haven't thought about it, but it's something to definitely think about. If you see your child with Angelman syndrome is able to do something, if they feel it was driven internally, if it comes from inside them, then they can use their device to make a sentence. But if you stand in front of them and tell them, do this now, make this sentence, they're unable to, because the anxiety and the apraxia have made it too difficult. A lot of times what we can do is work very hard to be non-confrontational. I always say you want to inspire, don't require. You also want to be conspiratorial, like you and your child are in this together, as opposed to confrontational, like you're telling the child they must do this. I mean, even on things like you want your child to get up and come to the bathroom to brush their teeth or to use the toilet, you go in and you say, all right, you need to get up now and come to the bathroom. Well, maybe sometimes they can get up and come to the bathroom, but if the apraxia is particularly bad at that moment or the anxiety is particularly bad at that moment, they'll play with each other, and then your child may very much want to do what you're asking, but getting that message from the brain to the body just doesn't happen. Apraxia is very much a message passing problem, right? So you've got this idea that I want to do this thing that you're telling me to do, or I want to do this thing that I want to do. Usually it's from the outside that you're telling me to do. And I'm trying to get my body to do it, and I just can't get it to happen because the message doesn't pass properly or at all. So a lot of times you can do things like go to your child and say, in a few minutes when you're ready, you come and head to the bathroom, and then walk away. And the anxiety may decrease and they'll be able to get up and come to the bathroom. It's even better if the idea comes from within them. They think, I need the bathroom. Maybe they use their talker and say, I need the bathroom, and they get up. So what we're always working towards is to decrease the anxiety enough that the apraxia decreases, and then to give them enough control of their worlds that they're not worried about anxiety, and when they want to say something, they can. So if we want to teach positive behavior to individuals with Angelman syndrome, then we need to offer communication and behavioral support, and we're going to talk about all of this. We need to teach and model how to talk to yourself via augmentative and alternative communication. We want to teach and model, and anytime I say model, I mean show. We want to teach and show how to practice emotion identification in others, and more importantly, in yourself. We want to teach and model how to calm yourself down and be self-soothing. And by the way, with the exception of the word AAC in here, this applies to every kid on earth. We want to reward communication instead of problematic behavior. Okay, if a child tries to pull your hair to get your visual attention and you know that's what they want, don't give eye contact, model, look at me, and then give the eye contact. So the eye contact came from the words look at me, not from having hair pulled. You want to reward all of these things, self-talk, emotional ID, self-soothing, all of these things you should just be very encouraging about. Oh, I like how you talk to yourself there. Oh, yes, you said you're happy. I can see that you're happy. You said you're mad. I can see that you're mad. Do you want to tell me more? Do you want a hug? Or, I like how you got your blanket to help yourself calm down. Good job. So really encouraging these things, rewarding them with social praise and eye contact and affection, which are the things that our kids with Angelman syndrome are oftentimes the most responsive to. So among our ideas of how we're dealing with anxiety and apraxia and the negative behaviors that can come from those things is the idea that we're going to use AAC as an intervention. And for that to work, AAC must always be available. If we expect kids to use their words instead of hitting or flopping or kicking or throwing things, then they need constant access to their words. And we also need to be thinking about situations with potential for challenging behaviors. And actual behaviors when they're happening is the moment when AAC is needed the most, not the moment when AAC is needed the least. Now, of course, AAC is much harder when you're upset and anxious and in the midst of maybe having a meltdown. So maybe we make those pages in the device or in the book simpler, but we still have words available so that kids can use their words. And maybe they're worked up to use their words at that moment. But one of the things we can do is stop talking and use their devices to talk to them instead. And doing that means that if you're using their AAC book or their device, their system, to talk to them and to say, you can calm down, you're safe. First of all, you're giving them a visual support. They're seeing the pictures as well as you saying the words and touching the buttons, and you're modeling for them, here's the language that goes with this situation. So that they can start to understand, like, when I start to get upset, I can say, I'm upset, I don't want to do this, I need a break. Because they've seen you do that in the moment and also not in the moment. You've taught it at other times through other means of intervention. Something that I'm constantly saying to the to the point where people tease me about it is you have to have words to prove you can use words. It's very important that we don't just have a child with 8 to 10 picture symbols of objects that they can request and then expect them somehow to communicate about their feelings or about their anxiety, about their other needs, or about how their day went. You need the words to say everything, and really thinking about, does your child have enough words to communicate with you when things get hard? And if they don't, what are you going to do about it? This is an older version of something called the Communication Bill of Rights, and if you've taken some of the other courses on Angelman University or seen me speak in other places, or you're involved in AAC social media groups, then you've seen this before, or the newer versions, or perhaps with different picture symbols. The reason I mention it is a lot of times, if I go through one by one the items in the Communication Bill of Rights, and I ask what was happening at the time of behaviors, we find that negative behaviors are directly correlated with a violation of the Communication Bill of Rights. So the first one in the upper left corner is I have the right to be given real choices. And oftentimes we'll see that when you tell a child, you need to get up right now and come with me, there's no choice there. So the denial of real choices is connected to the behavior that happened when you made that demand. So if you instead went to the child and said, do you want to get up and come with me now or in 5 minutes? You're offering a choice. Now, it isn't really a real choice. A real choice would be you can come and get up and come with me or not. That's up to you. That would be a real choice. But you have to keep it age appropriate. And any kid under the age of 18, or any adult with a boss, is at times going to be given choices that aren't totally real choices. But if we remember to always offer choices, they don't have to be, you don't want to say, do you want to, do you want to wash your hands? If it's not a choice, they have to wash their hands. But you can say, do you come wash your hands? Do you want to turn on the water, or should I? Or do you want to come with me to wash your hands right now, or wait a couple minutes? Do you want me to wipe your hands here and then we'll go wash them at the sink? Finding ways to give them some power and choice in the situation. If you look at the right to refuse or reject, a lot of times you'll see programs where a child asks for a break and they're told to do 2 more, and then the child hits somebody. Well, that child communicated a need for a break, and then that wasn't honored. So really thinking about, what are we doing? The right to get what I want. Now, in the real world, we don't always get what we want, right? Sometimes we get what we need, but we don't always get what we want. But at least to be heard and responded to, which is on here in another place. But if you say, I want to eat, I want a snack, and, you ignore the request, then the child may get frustrated. But if they say, I want a snack, and you say snack time is in 20 minutes, and then you model that on their talker, we will eat later, then they've been heard and acknowledged, and they know when their need is going to be met. So really thinking about, going through the Bill of Rights and making sure that you're meeting these needs can really decrease behavior. So some of the other ones are, I have the right to share my feelings. Yeah, I don't see this a lot in Angelman syndrome, but I see it a lot in other populations where a child will say, I'm mad, and somebody will say, no, you're not. Even if they don't look mad, the answer to somebody saying, I'm mad, is, well, tell me more about that. Why are you mad? What's upsetting you? And then they might say, oh, no, actually, I'm happy. Or you might say, oh, I see that you're smiling. People who are smiling aren't usually mad. Can you say more? I can't actually read these, so I'm trying to go off on memory. The right to be heard and responded to, even if the answer is no, is this one, which we talked a little bit with the right to make requests. The right to always have my system and for it to be in good working order. So we talked about that with AAC, has to always be near me. The right to be taught how to communicate. So, right, if a child doesn't have their system, or they haven't been taught how to use it, then of course you're going to see increased behaviors. The right to be treated with respect and dignity in the world. I know lots of kids that if you talk about them in front of them and act like they don't understand or can't hear that you just said their name, they will become very upset and act out in an aggressive manner. And we've just violated their rights, that they have a right to be upset. The right to be spoken to and not about, the right to be treated with dignity and respect, the right to be treated as an equal member of the community. I had a little girl with a different disability than Angelman syndrome, but a little girl who was included in kindergarten and came home from school and had her communication session with me, and she told me that she was upset because her teacher aide, well, she said, I'm upset because somebody hurt my feelings with her system. And then we were able to use her pod book communication system. She was able to tell me that her teacher aide made her leave when the other children were going to do a project. And when I pressed a little bit more, she said the teacher aide made her leave and go to the bathroom. So her point as a 6-year-old in kindergarten was nobody else had to leave and go to the bathroom right then. And of course, I didn't get to talk to the teacher aide, but I assume her point was we really needed to go to the bathroom. But really considering, how would a child of this age perceive this, a difference in how they're treated from everybody else? And how can we make sure kids and adults are treated in a way that makes them full members of their community? The right to have my AAC system in full working order, the right to know about my world and my schedule. We see a lot of issues around schedules in individuals with Angelman syndrome. They want to know what's happening next, and they don't, or they think they know what's going to happen, and it's not what happens, or kids who really lay out their week because they like the routine. So I work with a young lady I see on Fridays, and she'll go to school on Friday and start asking for me. And this is how we know she knows her days of the week, right? She maybe can't, Apraxia doesn't let us say what day is today, and then she answers Friday. But she comes into school on a Friday and says, Kate, 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 Kate. We know that she knows that it's Friday, and that's the day that I come to her house. Now, if I don't come to her house on a Friday, she becomes very upset. So she had an expectation about her schedule that wasn't met. So one of the things that we can do to prevent this is to make sure that people know their schedule, and if there's a schedule change, to really prep them for it. And this one is the right to get attention, and to be paid attention to, and to be, given the attention that we need. I think a lot of times we'll hear somebody say they're just doing that for attention as a way of dismissing the person or their behavior. But the truth is we all need attention, and that applies to individuals with Angelman as much as anyone else, and probably even more so because of how they use eye contact and social attention to deal with their anxiety. So, denying attention or saying, I'm going to treat this person's negative behavior by ignoring them, is a violation of their rights, especially if it's an anxiety-related behavior. So instead, let's look at ways can we teach them to ask for attention more appropriately. When we honor the Bill of Rights, we're supporting positive behavior. And we want to use all the tools in our toolbox. And one of those tools is to honor the AAC Bill of Rights. And I totally didn't make this slide just because I had a really cute picture of a kid with a toolbox. No, I wouldn't do that to you guys. Another thing we really need to do is consider receptive language. So when you're working with an individual with Angelman syndrome or another disability, you need to really think about you're speaking to that child in a clear and understandable language. You want to be using vocabulary that they understand. You want to have their attention when you're talking. You want to make sure that they can hear you. We need to remember that as adults in English, our rate of speech is 120 words per minute, give or take. But a young child or a child with auditory language processing problems, and many kids with Angelman syndrome might have that problem, need our language to be more at 140 words per minute. If you want to know what that sounds like, Mr. Rogers speaks at 140 words per minute, give or take. So watch an old episode of Mr. Rogers and the Land of Make-Believe and listen to how quickly they speak. That's about how fast we should be talking, especially when we're talking about something important that might lead to behaviors that are around anxiety or around anything else. If we're telling a child, we're going to get in the car and go see grandma, we need to make sure that we say that slowly and clearly and we actually say the words. I think sometimes we assume the kids know we're going to do something, and we're saying to each other, all right, well, we have to get going, we're going to be late, they're going to get upset, let's get them in the car, get our shoes on her, but nobody actually says to the child, okay, in 10 minutes, we're going to put your shoes on and get in the car. So really being clear. Considering the auditory processing challenges, I have a young lady who claps if she hears the word poop. So one of my tricks is I'll say poop sort of randomly, and which sounds bizarre, so hopefully we're not in public, and she'll applaud. I actually count how long does it take from when I say it to when she applauds, because that's about how long her auditory processing is taking at that moment, and it really varies. Sometimes it's a millisecond. The word is not out of my mouth before she's applauding, and sometimes it's a full minute. So really thinking about what does that mean if it's taking a full minute to understand something, then you can't be piling more and more words on, because by the time they understand the first words, they've already lost the next 3 sentences. One way to help us in this is to use the AAC system and model on the system to help us slow down and to add that visual component. And another thing to do is to have visual supports, and I'm going to spend some time explaining to you what I mean for that as well. So here are some visual supports that you might use. The first one is a child who puts their hands and objects out the window of the car. So we have the visual that we're going to be safe, This is the child's symbol for safe, and it's also the Mayor Johnson board maker picture for safe. And our hands stay in the car. And here's another one that says, one show and all done. So this is a child whose screen time is going to be limited and gets upset when TV is over. So we let them know you're going to watch one show and then it's going to be done. And this is a young lady who likes to knock, and I've since learned that lots of individuals with Angelman like to knock. It's the anticipation, I think, and the excitement of somebody might be at the door. So knocking is really, really fun because it makes us remember that happy enthusiasm and anticipation that somebody might be coming over. But too much knocking, especially if you live in an apartment or, you knock too hard on the walls or something, could be a problem. So this was just safe walls. So safe was a word that this individual knew. She knew it meant to have your hand still and to yourself. And walls, meaning, we're not going to bang on the walls. So visual supports provide information or direction visually. So it could be, and everybody uses them. This isn't a special needs thing. We just don't necessarily call them visual supports for the rest of the world. But anytime you go to the bathroom in a restaurant, at least in Massachusetts, I'm going to guess most states in the country and probably the world, anytime you go to the restroom, you'll see a sign that says all employees must wash their hands before returning to work. That's a visual support. It provides information or direction visually. Now, if somebody's literate, text is a just fine visual support. We all use visual supports in the form of calendars and to-do lists and other ways that we keep a grocery list, ways that we keep ourselves organized. They're all visual supports. But we just might do them more with pictures and be more specific with individuals who have a disability. They can be used as a communication and teaching tool on top of a visual support. Lots of times we can eliminate verbal language and just point to a visual support instead of saying something. You can teach how to communicate, view the content of visual support. So it can say, if you are upset, press I'm mad, or whatever it is, can be part of the visual support. They can serve as reminders for a specific time or a specific place. They should be specific. It shouldn't just say be good. It should look at some very specific thing that you are trying to support visually. You should teach them and rehearse them. It's not enough to hang a sign on the wall that says to employees should wash hands if it turns out none of your employees know how to wash their hands. So you have to actually teach the skill and then practice it. And obviously you're not going to do that in a restaurant with everybody who works there, but with our individuals with Angelman, or maybe we should, I don't know. With our individuals with Angelman syndrome, we are going to specifically teach these things. So we might go out to the car and sit in the car and show the hands in symbol and keep our hands inside the car and then be very happy and clap and applaud that our hands have stayed in the car. We'll rehearse this in different ways. Let's all switch seats and practice keeping our hands in the car again. This time we're going to drive up and down the driveway and we're going to keep our hands in the car and then reward all of the rehearsals so that the visual is paired with understanding what it means. And then, the positively reinforce that rewarding of all of the practices and whenever it's followed. So, even 2 months in, you have the hands in sign in your car, you've practiced it, you've rehearsed it, your child seems to get that they keep their hands in. You still want to stop sometimes and say, you know what, you did a really good job keeping your hands in the car. Give mama a big hug. You want to keep doing that so that the skill stays in place. And I'm not going to talk about this too much because I talked about it in some of the other courses, but aided language displays, which are, if you hear that noise in the background, that is thunder. Apparently we're going to have a thunderstorm, so stay with me, and if it gets too loud, I'll pause and be back to you in a few minutes. So these aided language displays have the language that you'll need, either a full core vocabulary, which I talked about in other courses, or specific words for the specific setting. So you can make large and small aided language displays for behavioral support. So some of these, what I mean is, for some of these, the idea is you're going to have the words to talk about what's happening including anything that you may need to communicate behaviorally that's happening. So let's say that you have an aided language display you've made for dinner time. And in it you have all of the core words and all of the other language that you're going to need to talk about dinner. But let's say your child is famous for eating off of other people's plates. So you might also want in this aided language display, or if you're just on their communication system, you might want in their communication system, you might want something that says, I eat off my own plate. And then another one that says, can we share, or let's share, so that you can work on these skills and support that behavior within the communication language display that you're using. So you can make posters at an office store or cafe press, or enlarge on a photocopy machine. You can beam a lot of iPad-based devices to your Apple TV if you have one, or an Android-based to a Chromecast. You can, they should be consistent. These aided language displays should be consistent with your AAC system, and as far as what symbols and how they're laid out and how they're color coded. So if your child's using a pod book like this, you probably don't want a aided language display that is core words like this, and vice versa. And you can create specific ADLs for positive behavior support and anxiety intervention. So you can have an aided language display that is about when you're upset. I feel upset, mad, jealous, angry. I need deep squeezes, a hug, music, a break, to run. I feel better, worse. You know, all of those words can be in a display, so you can talk about a situation as it's happening. And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of samples of that in a couple of minutes. So here's one that was made in the app Go Talk Now, and it's similar to the child's pod book, which they use. And they use another app for pod, but we wanted a low-tech, paper-based support for behavior. And then this is also in Go Talk Now, so we can open it to use there. So it has this child's specific needs. So it has I, you, not, feel, so sort of some core words that you would also find in the pod setup. But then the feelings that might be happening if you're starting to have a situation where a child is acting out. So bored, scared, excited, mad, mean, and that might mean you're mean, not necessarily I'm feeling mean, too loud, too crowded, something is different, someone is missing. There are some kids where that's important to be able to say, you know, I don't like schedule change, or someone is supposed to be here and they're not. And then things that might calm the child. I need to be alone, I need squeezes or deep pressure, I need music, I need space. And so this would be very customized for your child. What are the feelings they're having when they're having a problem and sort of in meltdown or very upset? What are some of the common causes? You know, if your child hates noise, or feeling like someone was mean, or crowds, or you want those things there. You can use visual supports for specific communication. So this is a fun one. This is just let's go outside swimming, but this is a child who really, really loves to swim. And normally says this with a gesture that is her natural gesture for swimming, but not everybody understands it. So this is how you make this message in her pod app. You touch let's go outside swimming. So you can make sentence strips or charts that look like this for messages about things that cause behavior. So don't touch me, I don't like when you touch my hands. And it shows how to say that message. And then you're going to model how to use them yourself to make the message. Oh, look, this sign is showing us how to ask for swimming. Let's go outside swimming. That's what you can say when someone doesn't understand when you sign swimming. And then once the message, once the child is able to do this independently, you can keep this as a support. You can make a book of all the things that the child has mastered and use it as a celebration. And you can also, if you're really in a tough place behaviorally, you can use this for communication in place of the negative behavior. So if we're so upset that, we can't even process enough to use our talker or our book, we can use the visual support as a way to communicate with the child, and the child to communicate back with us. So another thing I already mentioned is to use visual schedules. Visual schedules can be done lots and lots of different ways, and your special education teacher should be able to help you with how to make and use a visual schedule, or your ABA professional may be able to help you with that. In general, a visual schedule shows a sequence of events. This might be a tiny sequence. For example, a task visual schedule just shows the things in that particular task. So just the steps of washing your hand, just the steps of getting ready for bed. Or it might be a whole day, a part of the day, or a specific part of the day. So for this one, you can see that this is the schedule for a group session. So there was going to be music, and then some playing, and then a craft, and then some writing, and then go home. And that app is called ChoiceWorks. It's an app I like quite a bit. You can see here that on a timer is actually the steps for getting ready to go home at the end of the day. So this was a child would say, we need to leave the classroom to get on the bus in 10 minutes, and would set the timer for it. And then say, here are the things you need to get done. And then they would go through this and pull off each one as they were done. Or you can simply, for a child who doesn't have the understanding of multiple steps or a longer period of time, you can simply have them say a schedule that's first then or now later, or whatever language is in your communication system is the best language to use. That explains, well, now we're going to have dinner and later we're going to watch TV, or whatever the situation is. You can combine this with a timer or calendar like here, or a calendar you hang on the wall, or an app. Your goal is to reduce anxiety and increase independence. So if you have the task schedule for washing your hands, the goal is ultimately someday that child can do that on their own without you supervising. You can go with light tech or high tech, so it can be an app, it can be a smartphone or a mobile device, or it can just be paper. For a lot of us, just writing down to-do lists, that's our visual schedule of what we're going to do in our afternoon of running errands. And you can combine with AAC to discuss the future and the past. So you can, within their communication system, say, we went to the store, now we'll visit grandpa, and show them that the sentence and how to make that sentence in their speech system. So combining the visual support you're using for that afternoon of running errands or family time, and then also talking about it with their talkers. Another thing we really have to think hard about is teaching how to identify emotions within ourselves and within others. So individuals should be taught how to identify those feelings in themselves first and then in others. And you might say things like, you're smiling and you're holding your hands up. When you do that, you're excited, and then model that on their speech device. So they start to understand that, like, when I feel this way and my hands go up, I feel excited. That's what the word for that is. So then later they can talk about that they're excited. They may need some very specific instruction on how to match what they feel in their body to the words for that thing. So you may say to them, you're crying and fussing. I can see that something is wrong. You feel sad or you feel angry. When you throw things after mommy asked you to do something, I know you don't want to do it. You're angry that I asked you to do it. And really saying, this is the connection so that they can understand when I want to throw something, I'm probably angry. If I say I'm angry, then we can discuss it instead of having it go a different way where I end up acting out and maybe hurting somebody or hitting somebody. I work with an individual now who can say, I feel naughty. And when she says that, we know she really does. She might act out, so maybe back up. Many years ago, at the beginning of my career, I worked with a student, and he used an AAC system, which is now defunct, and it was set up so he could say, I don't feel safe. Give me space, so we'll all be okay. And when he said that, he meant that. So if he said, give me space, we backed up. And at the time, I had a teacher aide who would choose not to heed his warning and invariably got hit with the communication system. And I would always wonder, he warned you, he told you, I don't feel safe right now. So giving the kids the power to do that, to get what they need before they need to have use behavior to communicate with us. We're going to use lots of descriptive feedback. So that's you're doing this, this, and this. The word for that is. And then you're going to say those same things with their AAC system. Another thing you can do is you can make simple books that show a picture of the child expressing different feelings. So this one is, I feel happy, I am smiling, I am calm. So when we look at this and we read the book together, we can say, your face is smiling, your body is relaxed. Your hands, they're not up like when you're excited, and they're not flapping like when you're worried. They're still, or mostly still. So I can tell that you're happy and calm in this picture, and then show them on the device, oh, I am happy, I feel calm, so that they can work on that. And then you might have another picture where they're upset, and you can say, oh, look, you're crying and your lip is in the shape of a frown, you're sad or you're mad. And really, teaching these things instead of assuming they'll be picked up. And then we want to teach and model self-soothing. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to talk aloud when we're coping with our own emotions. You might want to save this for your milder upsets, but you want to show that this is how you deal with things. So let's say you're with your child in the car and there's traffic and you're starting to get anxious. You might say, there's traffic. We might be late. My body feels tight. My hands are in fists, or I feel my shoulders are up. I'm going to take some deep breaths because I feel worried. I'm telling myself, we're going to be okay. I can calm down when I'm worried. I can take deep breaths. That modeling of self-talk in context for your child, and that modeling of how do you calm yourself down is vital. And again, this is something, it's not just for our kids with Angelman syndrome, this is for all kids. We want to specifically teach how we calm down and how we regulate ourselves when we're excited or anxious or overwhelmed or scared or hurt or angry or any of those things. We need to show our kids and teach our kids very specifically, what do we do? So really thinking about, I'm very excited. I'm so excited that I'm having trouble focusing. I'm going to sit in my chair and put my feet on the floor and focus on finishing my lunch so that we can go to the park. Even though I'm excited, I'm sitting in my chair. I'm excited. I'm eating my lunch. I'm okay. We're going to go to the park. Or similarly with when you're hurt or when you're mad or overwhelmed. It is very noisy here. I do not like all this noise. I don't know if I can stay here. I'm going to ask to go back outside, and then model that on the device and say, let's go back outside. Or if there's somebody else with you and your child, you can step outside and leave your child there. But really showing these things. And then you want to rehearse them, okay? So you want to say, okay, today, before we, get into bed, let's practice taking deep breaths. This is something we can do when we're calm. We'll breathe in through our nose, like we're smelling a flower, and out through our mouths like blowing out birthday candles. Or you might say, we're going to take our hands and we're going to press them down onto the table and push hard to get some deep pressure to calm down. So really teaching these things and asking them to do this in school and your babysitters and everyone else to do this too. You also want to observe your child when your child is calm. What is the situation when they're calm? What's going on around them? And try to figure out if you can work those tools that are keeping them calm then into your usual interactions or into the situations where your child might get anxious. So if you know that a specific video or song calms your child down, you might hold on to that to those times when you really need it. Um, Another thing is to have in the speech device or in the speech system and also in your own mind and perhaps on a choice board or a set of picture cards that allow some choices to different things that are your child can use to calm down. So you can have a picture symbol for deep breaths, but there are other things you can do that make you take deep breaths without even knowing you're doing it. So like blowing bubbles, you have to take a deep breath to blow bubbles. To blow raspberries, you have to do a deep breath to do that. To sip water, you have to coordinate your breathing in order to sip. There are other things that you can do to sort of practice deep breaths. There are different breathing apps you can try for kids. Sesame Street has an app and many videos online that teach belly breathe. They even have a belly breathe song. So having that as an option, of course, teaching these things ahead of time. Apply deep pressure. So give yourself a hug, do wall push-ups, have your weighted blanket or your heavy thing that you like to hold, get wrapped up in a blanket burrito app. These wrap, not app. These sorts of things you should be able to ask your OT about. Different ways for doing deep pressure for self-calming. Also looking at music or other things that distract when a child is upset. Um, all of us sort of know what songs we need to have in our pockets in order to calm down an individual. So having them available, having a way to say, I want to hear, Shake It Off, or I want to hear the Cha-Cha Slide, or whatever it is. I want to hear everyone. I have actually many individuals who it's Santa Claus is coming to town, no matter when in the year you are. You want to, have a choice to take a walk or take a movement break. To do something like get on a swing, sit in a rocking chair, any of those movement things that can be calming. And then you want to teach, model, and rehearse these techniques from requesting to doing. So you might want to show the child, oh, I feel a little upset. I think I need my weighted blanket. And then say that with the communication system. And then get the weighted blanket and hold it. Take some deep breaths and say, I feel better. I asked for my weighted blanket and now I feel much better. And you want to make sure you're doing all of these steps, not just teaching the technique, but also how to ask for it and vice versa. So having these things available can help you have tools for when something arises where you're seeing some anxiety or anger related behaviors that are not necessarily typically very communicative besides I'm upset. But then also teaching how to go beyond that and calm yourself down. A big thing we need to think about is self-talk and self-regulation. So this is perhaps one of the most important things that we can do, is teaching and encouraging self-talk and self-regulation. What we need to remember is that the research on augmented and alternative communication shows us that there are 5 real reasons that we communicate, and the percentage of each of these changes over time as we age. But the reasons are we communicate for social closeness, so to feel connected to other people. We communicate to share information, so to tell things. We communicate to request, so to get our wants and needs met. We communicate for to be socially appropriate and to follow the rules. And we communicate self-talk. We communicate to ourselves with language. And we don't think about much, but this is sort of a running thing we do all day long. We talk to ourselves about what we need to do next, and And we think about what we hear and what we're doing and what we see, and we talk to ourselves constantly, and that's how we help keep ourselves regulated. And kids who don't have language, if you don't have language, you can't self-talk. So that's one of the most important things that we need to do, is really think about how are we going to give these kids the language they need to self-talk. And how are we going to make sure they have the right things that they need to say and to talk to themselves about, because we can't possibly put every single thing into their system. So we want to provide kids with messages in their communication devices that address their specific triggers, and what they need when they're in a place of anxiety or upset. So do they need space? Or they don't like meeting new people? They don't like loud noises? They don't like crowds? And we want to honor our children's messages about these things. So they might say, I don't feel safe because too many people are here. I need space. And then we say, okay, we'll give you some space. Now, my favorite thing is when the individual who uses the system that's in the photo says to me, too many people are here, and it's just the two of us. That's pretty funny. Because clearly, there's only one other person here, and so I must be the problem. And it's important we honor our children's messages about these things, even if it simply means saying, "Oh, okay, too many people are here. I'll move over to the other side of the room." And sometimes they say, "Oh, no, 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 don't do that," and because it was a mistake, because they were just practicing and exploring. But sometimes that is exactly what they need you to do. Or I'll have kids who say, "I need a timeout," and sometimes you're not always in a place where you can say, "Okay, go to your room and take a timeout," but you can say, well, you know what, I'll give you some space and I'll come back to you and give you some time to regulate. We want to model and act out the use of these things so that your child can see them in action. So you want to say to your child sometimes, I need space. And as we know, kids with Angelman like to be directly on top of you with their face millicentimeters from your face. So saying I need space is a pretty easy thing to model to them. And then you want to use that descriptive feedback too when you model. So you want to talk about both your affect, actions, and emotional state, and you want to talk about theirs. You want to say if they're looking upset, you might say, oh, or if they're looking excited, you might say, you're excited. You need a little bit of space. Or you might say, oh, I feel hurt. I need to take a time out because I'm feeling a little too hurt right now. So really teaching and encouraging this self-talk. And really thinking about this as an independent skill that really needs to be mastered in order to learn how to self-regulate. We had a contest a couple years ago called I Can Do More Than Request. It was a hashtag social media contest. And this is Samantha's I Can Do More Than Request. She has a button on her speech system, it's the one you just saw on the last page, where it says, I can have safe hands. Now, safe hands and placing both hands on her chest is the cue that her school and her family taught her from a young age of what of how to keep from hitting others or hurting people. So they'd say to her, safe hands, and she would put her hands on her chest. But we gave her a button that said, I can have safe hands, so that she can say that to herself. She's talking to herself when she says it, and she's reminding herself, I'm capable of having safe hands and being safe. And she'll say, I can have safe hands, and put her own hands on her chest. Now, sometimes she does this when she's perfectly happy and calm, and other times she does do it when she's upset. A lot of times when she does it and she's starting to get upset, we know to back up. She has to remind herself to have safe hands, and maybe we want to be a safe distance. And so I can do more than request. I can regulate my behavior through self-talk with my speech device, which is massive. I mean, what an amazingly wonderful thing to learn to be able to do. And it's a lot of work to get there, but all sorts of doors open when you can talk to yourself to self-regulate your own behavior. So now I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of pages from high electronic-based systems and non-electronic systems. So this is a child's program. The app is called Click or Communicate, And you can see this is their page for when they're upset. So they have, I can be safe, breathe in, breathe out. I need squeezes, leave me alone. I'm hurt, I'm lost, I'm sick, I'm upset. Help please, I have pain, I'm uncomfortable, I'm scared. I need the bathroom, I need time away, I need help, and it goes to the body parts page because this child would frequently have I'm hurt or I need squeezes, both of which need to be followed with the body parts. And the alarm just made a dinging noise to get people's attention before they communicated that they were upset. So this is, down here you see I can be safe and breathe in and breathe out. They were self-cues for self-talk. The rest were for talking about what was upsetting them. So it's sort of a hybrid page. This page is in Touch Chat. It's a child's page, again, for both self-regulation and communicating about what's wrong. So this child has some core words that fit on the page, and that's how the system works. This button, Mom, with the exclamation point, there's actually some of the voices have pre-recorded Mom, kind of in that way, and help. So those pre-recorded little buttons are there. And then we have the feeling words. So mad, hurt, worried, confused, tired, and I don't know what's wrong. And then we have some of the reasons. So because it's crowded, because somebody was bullying me, because it's too loud, because I'm missing somebody. And then we also have what we need. I need to know my schedule. I need my headphones. I need a break. I need music. I need a hug. So those are all things. That's why they're orange. I need to stop. I need to swing. I need to walk. So those are green because they're actions. And then we have some questions that you might ask if you're upset. So when, why, where, and explain it to me. So this child has all of their words here to both say like to themselves, because this child always was able to access their headphones and their schedule. I need my schedule, and then they would go and get their schedule. So this is another clicker communicate. Similar to the first one you saw, it has a lot of medical things. This child had a lot of medical needs. But down the bottom, it does have some of the things they need: chewy hug, music beanbag, some things to tell other people, back off, shut up, no, no, no. I don't want to, I don't like change. So within their talk for themselves, they have talk for other people too. This is the one you saw earlier that was in Go Talk Now for a native language display. It can also be used as electronic communication. It was based on the child's PAW book. And this is Samantha's PAW. Samantha, who I've talked quite a lot about today. We've changed it a lot since this picture. This picture is probably over a year old. These are much smaller now, but she has this button says I can have safe hands, which you can see that at this point she had said to herself over 2,000 times. I can have safe hands. She has look at me. So that isn't talking to herself, but saying look at me, and that in her case prevents a lot of the throwing behavior we used to see. I can wait. So that's something that she's usually talking about food for this, but I can wait. So over 1,000 times she's reminded herself that she can wait. I'm excited. So that's used a lot less. And I can calm down is used a lot less. Those are newer. And those are right on her homepage, so she does not have to navigate to get to them. They're always, always there right at the top of her communication system. But I'm going to show you what you see when she goes to something is wrong. So this is her something is wrong page. She has don't touch my hands. This has actually since been replaced. I need the bathroom now. Touching her hands, people have learned to respect that now, so she doesn't need to say it as often. So we moved it to a different place, whereas some of her toileting issues were a little more urgent, so we put the bathroom button here. So then she's tired, mad, and I don't feel safe, which normally I think says grumpy on this page. And I'll show you what it says on the I don't feel safe page in a minute. She is sick, hurt, health, which are normal in POD. I don't like it, which is normal in POD here. I don't want to do it, which is always in POD, but we made yellow as sort of a help for her to find it when she needs to find it. So let's look at what the I don't feel safe page is. And remember, the I don't feel safe, she's talking to herself as much as she's talking to other people. So I don't feel safe, I don't like change. Really, who does? I don't need to pull hair. It hurts. She pulls, or used to pull hair a lot, still sometimes. Look at me. I need attention. So she has it here and on that top page. I don't bite, just saying, which is sort of a joke because she doesn't bite. But she likes that it gets a laugh. Kind of cheers her up after she's told us that she's upset. I'm too excited, so that's when she gets overstimulated. I need space. I need to hide my eyes or ears. She frequently covers her eyes or ears, or covers her ears and then uses her elbows to cover her eyes. So sort of letting us know I'm going to hide for a little while. I'll look at you when I'm ready. I don't want to. This ended up being moved because it was already under the I don't want to folder. A larger button for self-talk that says I can be safe. What's happening? So a question, too many people are here. I need a timeout. You can she's asked for a timeout over 1,000 times. And I need to poop, which for her is one of the things that really triggers her anxiety and gets her upset, is knowing that she is going to need to use the restroom, and worrying about the pain and the interactions and everything that comes with needing to use the bathroom as a kid who has some neurological GI issues. So on top of this, you want to do planned teaching for increasing communication and decreasing anxiety and negative behavior. So you want to look at situations which trigger those things and really start to teach the skills for those situations. And you can start with just one situation. So you pick the situation, identify an activity that causes stress or behaviors for your child. So pick a time that you're seeing some problems, and then we're going to work through it. You're going to try to pinpoint specifically what is upsetting. So you want to be a detective here. You want to take notes on when the situation happens. You want to ask other people. I think frequently we all base what we think is happening on our experiences, and then other people have completely different experiences. And we find out, well, hold up, maybe it's this other way. I work with a young lady who has some obsessive compulsive issues on top of her other diagnoses, and she was hitting her mom. And, we really couldn't find a function. It seemed to have all sorts of functions sometimes, and then sometimes it seemed to have no function. Sometimes she would really seek out her mother from no matter where she was to hit her specifically, and it didn't really make sense until we really thought about the nature of her obsessive compulsive disorder diagnosis on top of everything else, and the fact that what OCD means is you're compelled to do something. And if you talk to people who are verbal who have OCD and an understanding of what's going on, they'll tell you that they have a thought in their head that says, you must do this thing or something bad will happen. So if you don't wash your hands, your mother will be sick. And so for this child, we don't know for sure, but we think part of what's happening is she's having a thought in her head that says, you need to hit your mom for everything to be okay. So really, it took a lot of us a lot of time to sit down and really come up with, okay, is it this, is it that, is it the other thing? And then really thinking, okay, if it's OCD, how are we going to work with her psychiatric team to address this, and ultimately that ended up being through medication. But you need to do that sort of detective work. And I'm not saying it'll go there for your child or for any child. I've been doing this for 20 years and it's only ever gone there for one kid, so it's pretty unlikely. But just really thinking about what are all the possibilities, what could be going on in their body and in their head. And then we're going to use things like social stories, which I'm going to talk about, and videos to teach about the activity, event, or problem. So if your child has trouble going to a new place, or if your child has trouble when another child comes too close, or if your child isn't being safe when a new person comes to your house, or maybe when a preferred person pays attention to a different child. Any of these things could be something where you're seeing not enough communication and too much anxiety or acting out behavior that might be the thing you want to pick to try to work on. And then you're going to model and rehearse how to act appropriately or leave the activity if that's the better choice. So you need to think about, all right, so this child is getting upset or aggressive when someone they don't know enters a room. So we need to start to think about how are we going to show this child what to do when a new person comes in the room. So you'll think of all the ways that you can do that and all the tools that you can put in place for that. And once you put the tools in place, you're going to show them how to do it. You're going to start with tiny exposures to the activity, and you'll end it when the child starts to give you cues it's time to stop, and model how to appropriately end or leave at that time. So I'm going to do a case study in a few minutes, but if we were thinking again about somebody who gets upset when somebody new comes into their space, you might want to start having, if you're in a school perhaps, having somebody stop by, knock on the door, open it, and then leave. And then do that a little bit more and a little bit more as you teach the skills to be okay. You're going to praise your child for trying, even if they aren't successful, and you're going to rehearse and repeat. Now, you should work through all of this with everybody on your team, your ABA specialists, the rest of the family, speech and language, so the right speech and language things are there, OT, so you're thinking about the sensory aspects, but you want to make a plan to move forward. And then you may think about using social stories. So social stories are stories that are designed, they were invented rather by Carol Gray. She created them. They are trademarked. The term social story is a trademark term. And she has very specific directions for using them. So you can Google Carol Gray social stories and find her website and read all about them. So this is just a teeny overview. She has lots of information. So they're usually written in the first person perspective. So I. They avoid assumptions. So unless you sort of can really prove something is happening, you shouldn't assume in the book. So you don't want to say, I feel happy if you are guessing. But if you observe, every day I go to school and I feel happy, and you know that because every day your child is calm and relaxed and smiling and not showing any of their indicators of being upset, then it's okay to say, but you can't just assume it. They use a patient and respectful tone. We never call a child bad or make fun of a child in a social story. Not that anybody would ever do that, but I guess it doesn't go without saying if she felt she needed to include it in her information. It includes two kinds of sentences: descriptive, so I feel happy, and direction. So something like, then or I can put my hands in my pockets, or whatever sort of directive sentence is going to help them in the situation. You aim for two descriptive for every directive sentence. So you want to be the book to be more about talking about what's going on than about telling them what to do. The perspective is always positive. So it always ends with something like, I can be okay when someone new comes in my classroom, or I know how to be safe when I go out to eat. You're going to remember that about half of the stories you create should celebrate strengths and successes. So you don't just make them for when you're having a problem. You also make them for when something is going wonderfully as a way to celebrate. My favorite app for making social stories is called Pictello. It costs about $20 for an iPad. What I like about it is you can have video clips as well as pictures. I like that a lot of my children who have some literary skills are able to make their own books by themselves. And you can use it for lots of other things other than social stories. But I do really like it for social stories. I also like that it has its own sharing server. So if you save it to the sharing server, which is free when you buy the app, you'll be given an 8-digit code, and that code can be entered into any other Pictello app, and the book will automatically download, which is great for when you write a book that needs to be shared on multiple iPads. So now let's talk a little bit about Samantha and restaurants. So this is Samantha. You've heard me talk about her a lot today. She's now 16. She started using her pod system at age 12. We started this intervention for restaurants and her behavior in restaurants. When she was 13, Samantha is deletion positive. She does have seizures, but they are very, very well controlled. But sometimes she does have significant behavioral-based communication, throwing, hitting, kicking, hair pulling, dropping to the floor. We kind of rarely see these things now. I mean, they definitely happening, hair pulling more than others, but not at the rate we used to see them. We used to see a lot of aggression and acting out around things that usually were anxiety related. And eating out at a restaurant was one of them because she has a lot of food-related behaviors, as is common in some kids with Angelman syndrome. So for restaurants, typically she was unable to wait. So she entered the restaurant and she really felt like the minute she sat down, there should be food in front of her. And of course, that's not how it works. And then when she was done eating, that was even more of a problem. So if we had to wait to pay the bill or wait for others to finish eating, she would get really upset. She wanted to leave the minute she was done with her dessert. So our intervention included really watching this restaurant stuff happen for a while. Samantha is the one who has the safe hands command. So we did have that in our toolbox that we can tell to have safe hands, and sometimes that works to redirect some of her more aggressive behavior. We introduced a social story, and you can actually see this is Samantha here watching it on the television. So we beamed from the iPad to the TV a Pictello-based social story that I'll read to you in a couple minutes, so you will have heard it. We really worked with her skills trainer, so it was a 2-on-1 situation in the community at first. So it was myself and her skills trainer, and it was the two of us with her in the community working on going to a restaurant. So we started with very, very short trips to a pretty much empty coffee shop. So we arranged it to go to this coffee shop when there was probably nobody going to be there based on when they were busy. And only she ordered and ate. The skills trainer and I did not eat anything because the idea was the minute she has to be done, we were going to leave. So we would go in. She had programmed on her speech system some of the different possibilities she might want for an order. She usually ended up ordering whipped cream in a cup, which is one of her preferred snacks. She loves whipped cream. So she would go in, she would order the whipped cream in a cup. We would sit down, she would eat some of it. She'd indicate she wanted to leave with her talker and with gestures, and we would leave. And we did this repeatedly, building up longer and longer amount of times, and then adding in with us having something to eat too, and increasing the amount of time she had to wait. And then we started to add other restaurants and more crowded places and places where you have to actually get a menu and wait to give your order and then wait for the food. It's an ongoing process, and we still have bad days sometimes. But in general, now she is able to eat out even at restaurants where she needs to wait to order. The last time I went out to eat with her, we went for Thai food. So she had to go into the restaurant. She had to sit in her seat. She had to pick what she wanted. She had to wait for the appetizer to be brought and the food to be brought. She had to eat and we had to eat. She had to wait for us to finish. She had to wait for us to pay the bill. And then we had to leave. And she actually normally the leaving part was normally the problem. So the first time I ever went to a restaurant with her, she was so upset that the food was done and we weren't leaving yet that she used her arm to clear everything off the table and, plates and napkins and everything flying across the room. And then she made a swipe at other people's tables when we tried to get her out. And she tried to hit people as we left the restaurant. But this last time we went at the end, she was done eating and we waited for the check. She was so excited to see other people in the restaurant that would eat. She was happy for them and not necessarily jealous that they had food. And somebody said hi to her, and she became so excited that somebody said hi to her, that she actually got very loud in a happy, loud way. And we got up to leave, and she had to stop and hug me intensely for a while and was just so happy with the whole experience. And I mean, the total opposite of what it used to be like to take her 3 years ago to eat in a restaurant. Um, we all have to remember that we have to continue to do this. We have to still show her the social story in the videos and practice talking about how to ask to leave, because there's no guarantee that there won't be some other anxiety trigger. There was no guarantee when that person said hi to her that she was going to get excited instead of upset. There was no way to predict that. So we have to still always remember that, I always say behaviors don't go extinct. They go dormant. And if the right conditions occur, then the behavior can come back. And that, I think that's important for all of us to remember that, nothing ever goes away for good. And for any of us, we may think we stopped biting our nails, but you put the right conditions together, we're going to start biting our nails again. And the same is true with an individual with Angelman syndrome. She's just always being cautious and revisiting these skills, even though it seems like they're totally mastered, just to be safe.
I like to go out to eat. I like to go to restaurants. I can order my food. I use my talker. I can sit quietly and be safe to eat. I have fun eating and drinking. I am safe at the table. I can be safe at the restaurant. I can be safe even when I need to wait. I can be safe even when it is almost time to go. When I'm done eating, I want to leave right away. I want to go in the car right now. But I need to wait. I need to be safe. I am safe. I keep the food on the table. I keep the chairs and tables on the floors. I sit in a chair. I can have fun at the restaurant. Then I can be safe and wait to leave. I am good at being safe.
You know what? Let me go back and let me set it up so that you can see the social story. All right, so I hope that social story was helpful in seeing one of the ways that we worked with her through this, in addition to additional exposures and using some videos and lots of augmentative communication intervention and augmentative communication modeling. So let's think about in the moment. So you're having a moment where your child is being more aggressive or is communicating through negative behaviors. What do? Well, obviously, you want that to stop, but we need to think about what we're doing in terms of how can we help the child learn through the experience. So here are some do's and don'ts. Sometimes when a child is being aggressive, we might yell, quiet hands or hands down or something like that. Which is fine if you have a taught command like save hands, but you might want to also add some descriptive feedback and modeling. Your hands are grabbing me. You could tell me and then use the AAC device to model the word stop, right? And that's assuming that the child was grabbing you as a way to get you to stop, but you would obviously change that word based on the situation. You tell the child, stop it, don't throw. Instead, you could say, you threw your cup. Instead of throwing, you could tell me, look at me. Or instead of throwing, you could tell me, all done. A child picks something up and that's not food and puts it in their mouth, or is food, but it's been on the floor for a week. Ew, don't put that in my mouth, oh, gross. And instead of doing that, which is lots of social attention, you can say, you put that old hot dog in your mouth. Instead, you could say, look, and then throw it away. Child who's dropped to the floor, you need to get up. You can't lay on the floor here. Get up. You need to get up. Instead, you could say, I see you're on the floor. You could tell me that you need to stop, or you could tell me you don't want to go. And sort of giving them some language. And it's hard in the moment, but trying to reframe, how can we do this in a way where we're giving them the tools for the next moment? mean, obviously the behavior or, negative behavioral communication is already happening. So how can you intervene for next time while it's happening in the moment? It's important that we try to understand why the behavior has happened so we can always offer the correct alternative. If we tell the child, you can tell me to stop when what they wanted was attention, then, that can be tough. In the moment, it may be hard to know, but if it's a recurrent behavior, you're going to want to work with your behavioral specialist and your special ed teacher to really look at what is the function of the behavior. And this approach can also work with other behavioral approaches. So if you're doing a reward program or an ignoring program or some other approach, you can also do descriptive feedback and modeling as part of that. So if you're a child, if you are, I'm trying to think of a good example and I don't have one at the top of my head. Let's say your child gets a token for, every 10 minutes that they don't hit. And then they hit. So instead of saying, you don't get a token, you can say, you're hitting me. Instead, why don't you tell me I'm finished, or I want you to look at me, or whatever the message is. And then of course they also still don't get the token. You're not changing that program. You're just adding in the language piece. So maybe next time, instead of hitting, they'll say, I don't want to do this anymore. And you can say, oh, okay, well, stop. And then they'll be able to earn their token in that moment. So you can use this sort of augmentative and alternative intervention communication-wise to add to your behavioral interventions. And with that is sort of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So this is Samantha again, and you can see that, she is in the hospital, and you can see that she's looking somewhat distressed, and she's had an IV placed, but she does have her talker. And what you can't see is that in the talker, she is talking about what's wrong and what's bothering her and how she feels. So you can see here she's on her something is wrong page. No, she's on her feelings page. And I'm telling us how she feels. I think she said, I feel upset or feel scared. And I can't really see, but I'm pretty sure this was it. And then here, I think it says something about being at the doctor with the seizures. So if you know something anxiety provoking is going to happen, and that may be like, specifically, we are definitely going to the hospital to have, our yearly checkup and they're going to do x-rays, or it might be sometimes people get sick and we all need to know at some point in our life we might have to go to the emergency room. So very specifically, or sort of in general, that this might happen someday, then you can pre-plan and put it into action some techniques that will work for your kid. So you can write a social story about the situation and watch videos of it. I have a young lady who, today's Thursday, right? Tomorrow, she's going to have a very simple procedure, but she will go under general anesthesia tomorrow. So we have spent a lot of time reading social stories about going to the hospital and that her favorite stuffed animal will be there and that she'll be fine and mom will be there and she'll be safe and hear all the things she can say and she'll wake up and she'll get a treat and all of those things. And then we've watched lots and lots of videos on YouTube of kids going to the hospital for the same procedure and them going in and going to sleep and waking up. We are able to inform people ahead of time what our child needs. So if you have a handout ready that you can give to the nurse if you're going to the hospital, or that you can give to the waitress if you're going into a restaurant that says, my child has Angelman syndrome. We're working on learning how to eat at a restaurant. I'm very sorry if they're loud or disruptive. Thank you for your patience. This is an important skill for my child to learn. And then tip really well. Or you can do this at the hospital. My child has Angelman syndrome. Please, talk to me before they come in. Don't talk about her in front of her. If you need to do a procedure, discuss with me the steps ahead of time. Whatever you need to do to prepare the environment for them, and to step in early if things start to go poorly. And then remembering to use eye contact, because that's so powerful in Angelman syndrome. Calming words and sounds, any visual supports, sensory items, music, all that stuff you taught for deep breathing and different relaxation, having that all ready. Whether something's going to happen tomorrow, or you know that it might happen someday. You know, having a toolkit ready for, you know, if we ever need to go to the hospital is a lot better than being caught in the moment with a child who's not only so sick that you're taking them to the hospital, but is also having negative communicative behaviors. So just really thinking these things through as much as you can, and doing what you need to do to prepare ahead of time. And I'm going to leave you with this picture of Samantha. Remember at the beginning I talked about teaching cooperation instead of compliance, and that our main job growing up is to figure out who we are. So Samantha leaves you with the thought, always be yourself, unless you mean unicorn. Then be a unicorn. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed this course.